Part of the problem is that it's a work in action at the moment. While we do have a new Public Health Act, we don't have a new regulation as yet. And I can't tell you too much about it because it's subject to parliamentary privilege, which means Parliament's still working on it. However, I can tell you some of the things that are going to be included. The current Public Health Act 1991 gives powers for a regulation to be made for the eradication of risks to public health and to the closure of swimming pools. So as I mentioned before, it's basically about trying to stop public health risks. Underneath the Act, there's subordinate legislation, which is known as the Public Health Swimming Pools and Spa Pools Regulation, and that specifies the basic building blocks of what public health is about. So it gives the ability for environmental health officers to close swimming pools and to take matters to court. Under the regulation, there's also what we have as guidelines. And guidelines are really used as a way of defending how you operate a swimming pool. So if you're taken to court for an offence under the swimming pool regulation, it is a defence to prosecution if you comply with our guidelines. One of the things that we heard quite strongly from the swimming pool industry was that they wanted actually more guidance. They wanted a bit more of a textbook. So we set out to try and develop that, and it was going to be called Code of Practice. But there was a lot of confusion, particularly in regulatory circles, as to what the difference would be between guidelines and a draft and a Code of Practice. In December last year, we had a new Public Health Act promulgated. It hasn't got a date of commencement as yet, and that's because we're waiting for the new regulations to be developed by government. We're hopeful that this new Act will start in January or February next year when the government has finished doing its consultation on the regulations. One of the things that's under the Act is Part 3, Division 3, Control of Public Swimming Pools and Spa Pools. And the biggest ticket item under that, and I've got it there in red, is prescribed operating requirements. You'll get to learn and understand and love those three words through the next 10 years of the operation of the regulations and the Act. Everything will be as these prescribed operating requirements. Prescribed operating requirements simply means something that is prescribed by regulation. And so in the regulation, there will be certain levels prescribed. Part 3, Division 5, has things called improvement notices and prohibition orders. So, if you don't comply with a prescribed operating requirement, there can be a prosecution for that, and that in itself can be an offence. However, one of the ways the department wants to be more flexible is to also introduce what's known as improvement notices. That is, where you are given a notice is served on you telling you what is wrong and what the department or the local council wants you to fix up. If you don't comply with that improvement notice, then a prohibition order can be served on the occupier of the swimming pool. A prohibition order is the same thing as a closing order. Part 3, Division 5, talks about environmental health registers, which basically means that all public pools, and they will be called public pools, need to register with the local council, and that facilitates local councils being able to carry out inspections if they've got a database of all the public pools in their areas. Section 134 talks about regulations, and that outlines what the provisions can be in regulating standards for pools, and particularly for closure when there are risks to health. So the risks will actually be quantified and placed within the regulation. Guidelines, as they are at the moment, will be repealed because the guidelines, or the essential components of them, the chemical criteria, will actually be engulfed into the regulation itself. Code of practice will not be a code of practice. It's anticipated that they will be changed a little bit and called guidance notes. Bearing in mind that under current regulation, the maximum penalty is $2,000, and that's recoverable through taking people to court. This time, operation of premises must comply with those three words again: prescribed operating requirements. The maximum penalty for an individual will be is $10,000, and for a corporation, $50,000. This rather surprised us because we asked for a doubling of these in the new regulation, and it's actually the government at that time, when this was being drafted, suggested these much higher penalties. Improvement notices is a direction to comply with the prescribed operating requirements and which should be given the maximum time of 72 hours to comply. If you don't comply with the improvement notices, then a prohibition order can be served to close the pool. Here's the penalties. Individual, $22,000 and 12 months in jail and $11,000 a day for non-compliance. Corporation, $55,000. The CE of that corporation would go to jail for 12 months and the daily penalty is $27,500. As I said, the regulation is under development. There's no draft yet. It's a work in progress by people known as Parliamentary Council, and these people are actually part of Parliament. And as I said, the new regulation is under parliamentary privilege, and I can't tell you exactly what is in it. On-the-spot fines are a probability. However, I do know the Parliamentary Council is not keen on on-the-spot fines for where a measurement is taken, the exception being radar cameras on our roads. Schedule 1 to the regulation will be these prescribed operating requirements. We need to have a draft regulation and what's called a regulatory impact statement. I've got July with a question mark there. That's gone. It's more likely to be September at this stage.